Cole Hargrove brought his old Ford pickup to a hard stop in the middle of the dirt road and stared at something that had no right to exist. Gondola cars gleaming, brand new, were gliding directly over the roof of his house. 15 feet, maybe less. The cable machinery hummed with the patience of something that had always been there, as if the chairlift had been built before he was born. Before he had ever pressed the first stone into this ground with his own hands, he stepped out of the truck. Workers stood scattered near the lift tower. And at the center of all of it, white body-fitted dress, leather bag in hand, sunglasses pushed up into loose hair, was a woman watching the system run with the expression of someone finishing something that should have been done weeks ago. Cole walked straight toward her. "What are you doing on my land?" She turned, looked him over one slow pass, nothing hidden, then reached into her folder and slapped a thick stack of papers against his chest. "I am the owner of this property. You have 3 days to vacate." Cole did not flinch. He took the documents, looked her in the eye, and said quietly, "You sure about that?" The corner of Sloan Vetterly's mouth moved, not a smile, something colder. "Say one more word and I'll have equipment here to level that structure before your 3 days are up." He gave one slow nod, then turned and walked back toward the house. And when he reached to push open the door, his left sleeve rolled to the elbow. Sloan caught a glimpse of something on his forearm. Dark ink along the muscle. A tattoo. Something about it pulled at the edge of her memory in a way she could not place. The door closed. She stood still while the machinery kept running around her. She shook her head and turned back toward the mountain. It was nothing. A coincidence. It had to be. That evening, Cole sat at the old desk by the window with every page of the document spread out under the lamp. The public land acquisition clause had been approved 16 months ago, signed off by a county council while Cole was working a job site 40 miles away. On paper, it was clean, properly filed, properly stamped, properly entered into the public record. But the land itself had been registered as private property since his father's time. There was a clear inheritance clause, documented and filed with the Harlan County Recorder's Office in 1987 and updated when Cole's father passed the title forward. That clause appeared nowhere in Vetterly's paperwork. It hadn't been challenged or disputed. It had simply been left out. Someone had made a deliberate choice to omit it. Cole read the documents through twice. Then he set them in a neat stack, weighted down with a coffee cup, and turned off the lamp. He did not sleep well. He drove to Ray Coulter's place before sunrise the next morning. Ray was a former Harlan County Sheriff's deputy, 61 years old, with the kind of face that had heard everything twice and forgotten very little. He poured coffee before Cole had finished sitting down, and then read through the documents without speaking, turning each page with the deliberate patience of a man who knew what he was looking at and was in no hurry to be wrong about it. "There's something wrong with how they handled the inheritance clause," Ray said finally, setting the papers down flat on the table. "This needs a land attorney, someone who knows how Harlan County recorded private ownership before the county digitized its records around 2010. There may be documentation that predates what Vetterly's legal team pulled." He looked up. His eyes moved to Cole's left forearm, to the dark block letters tattooed along the muscle. Navy. Ray had seen that tattoo 100 times and never needed to comment on it. Today he did. 16 years you served this country. 12 of them in the teams. This land is yours, Cole. Don't let anyone take it just because they have more lawyers than you do. Cole said nothing. He finished his coffee and drove back to the farm. At the house, he opened his laptop and typed Sloan Vetterly's name into a search engine. The results came back quickly. Vetterly Alpine Group, headquartered in Chicago. Luxury ski resort development across Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and now Kentucky. Annual revenue placed in the high hundreds of millions. And there, in a profile from a business publication, dated 2 years prior, a photograph of a woman seated at a glass conference table, 32 years old. Named CEO following the sudden death of her father, Gerald Vetterly, the company's founder and longtime chief executive. 2 years. She had been in the role for exactly 2 years. Cole read the article twice and then read it a third time with more care. Every legal mechanism that had been used to acquire the Harlan County land corridor had been set in motion before Sloan Vetterly took the position. The county council filings, the acquisition clause language, the timeline of the approach, all of it bore the signature of Douglas Finch, identified in the company's organizational documents as Director of Legal Affairs, a man who had held the role for 11 years, a man who had been with Gerald Vetterly from nearly the beginning. Cole sat back in his chair and looked at her photograph. She was looking directly into the camera with the composed certainty of someone who had practiced presenting that composure. She was young, not inexperienced. The article made clear she had worked inside the company for 4 years before taking the top position, but young in a specific way. The way of someone who had been handed a machine that was already running and was still learning its full dimensions. She had not built this. She had inherited it. The company, the growth strategy, the acquisition pipeline, and whatever Douglas Finch had been doing inside all of it, while her father's attention was on other things. He closed the laptop and thought about that for a while. The next morning, Finch's office sent an additional notice, a detailed survey map showing the chairlift corridor running straight through the western edge of the farm, 12 meters from the house. The document indicated no alternative routing had been evaluated. Cole unfolded the map, studied it carefully, then folded it back along its original creases and set it with the rest of the papers in the folder on his desk. Sloan came back to the farm alone 2 days later. No Finch, no crew, no assistant trailing behind her. She had told herself it was due diligence. A final walkthrough before the situation moved to the next phase. But the truth, which she did not yet fully acknowledge, was that something about the previous encounter had not settled the way it should have. Cole was repairing fencing along the north pasture when her car turned up the road. He saw it from a distance but kept working, driving a post into the ground with a measured, unhurried rhythm that didn't change when she stepped out of the car or when her footsteps crossed the gravel toward him. He did not stop until she was close enough to speak to without raising his voice. The farm looked different when she moved through it without a purpose to accomplish. She walked along the fence line slowly, taking in what she hadn't allowed herself to see the first time, what she had been too busy performing authority to notice. The porch columns had been re-reinforced with fresh-cut timber, fitted flush and plumb. The windows were double-paned, framed in wood that had been shaped by hand, not cut from a standard kit. The kitchen garden on the eastern side was covered with a hand-strung wire mesh, the kind of careful, small-scale work that takes hours and that nobody would see from the road. Sloan had approved development projects on 6 mountains in the past 2 years. She had reviewed site surveys and soil reports and structural assessments for properties worth tens of millions of dollars. She had never once stood in a place and felt it the way she was feeling this one. This was not a structure that a person lived in while waiting for something better. Every repair, every addition, every corner of this farm had been built by someone who meant to be here. When she stepped up onto the porch to leave an additional notice, the front door was standing slightly open, not enough to enter, but enough to see through into the front room. She did not go in. But through the gap she could see the far wall, and on it, mounted level, hand-carved from a piece of dark walnut, a small wooden plaque. The letters had been cut by hand, each one deliberate, slightly uneven in the way of something made without a template. "Diane, this is the place you chose. I'm keeping it." Sloan stood still on the porch for a moment longer than she meant to. Cole came up the steps behind her. "Something else you need?" She held out the notice without looking at him. He took it. She walked back down to the car and got in and sat for a moment before she started the engine. On the road back down the mountain, she called Finch. "The inheritance clause on the Hargrove land," she said. "Did you review the original private registration filing, not the county acquisition record?" "The original? It doesn't affect the acquisition," Finch said. "That's not what I asked you." A pause. "The acquisition is legally sound, Sloan." She ended the call. In 2 years of working alongside Douglas Finch, she had never once heard him answer a direct question with a statement about a different subject. She had always taken his fluency and confidence as competence. Tonight, for the first time, she was not sure those were the same thing. Sloan spent the following morning asking questions in town. She stopped at the diner, the hardware store, the post office. Every conversation eventually produced the same name: Ray Coulter. Retired deputy. Lived out on the county road east of the Hargrove property. Knew everyone. She found Ray's place without difficulty and knocked on the door. He opened it, looked at her for a moment, taking in the pressed slacks, the leather bag, the careful composure of a person who had come prepared, and then stepped back and held the door open. "Coffee," he said. "Please." She told him she was conducting community outreach on behalf of Vetterli Alpine Group. Ray poured 2 cups and sat down across from her at the kitchen table and said nothing for a moment. He was 61 years old and had spent 30 years reading people across that same table. He knew exactly what kind of outreach this was. "What do you want to know?" he said. "Cole Hargrove," Sloan said. "How long has he been here?" 6 years, Ray said. He came after he got out. Built the house himself. Took him about 8 months working alone. Got out of what? Ray looked at her over his coffee cup. Navy. Special operations. He did 12 years. SEAL teams. He set the cup down. He wasn't pushed out. He chose to leave. Because Diane wanted to raise their daughter here, and he decided that mattered more than the career. Sloan was quiet for a moment. Why hasn't he filed any legal challenge to the acquisition? Because filing a legal challenge takes money he doesn't have, and time he'd rather spend with his daughter. Ray folded his hands on the table, and because Cole Hargrove does not ask for things, not from anyone, he never has. What happened to his wife? Ray picked up his coffee again. He looked out the window at the tree line for a moment before he answered. Diane died in a construction accident. 3 years ago. He did not say anything else. But something in the way he looked out that window, some careful stillness around the edges, told Sloan that there was more to that sentence than what he had spoken aloud. She did not press him. She didn't yet have the right question to press with. She thanked him, left her card on the table, and drove back toward town. That evening, Ray sent Cole a text message. Cole was sitting on the porch in the dark when his phone lit up. She just sat at my kitchen table for an hour. Cole typed back. What did she ask? Ray's reply came after a minute. The right things. But Cole, she's not what I expected. There are things about her own company she doesn't know yet. Cole set the phone face down on the armrest. He sat there a long time after that, looking out at the mountain, listening to the cable machinery hum in the dark above his roof. For the first time since she had slapped that folder against his chest, he was not entirely certain that Sloan Vetterly was simply his enemy. She came back 4 days later. No Finch, no documents, nothing in her hands at all. Cole was splitting wood in the side yard when her car came up the road. He set the axe down and watched her walk toward him. She was dressed more simply than before, still put together, still expensive in that particular way that was difficult to conceal, but there was no clipboard, no folder, nothing to indicate she had come to accomplish something specific. She walked with the slightly uncertain posture of someone who had made a decision and was still determining whether it was the right one. She stopped a few feet away. I want to understand why you won't take the money. Because money doesn't buy this place back, Cole said. Everything has a price. He looked at her for a moment. Not with hostility, with the particular attention of someone measuring a distance. How old are you? Sloane's chin came up slightly. 32. Does that matter? No, he said. It's just you said that the way someone says it who's never lost something they couldn't replace. The silence that followed was longer than Sloan expected. She had prepared arguments before she drove up here. She had revenue projections and regional employment data, and a legal team that charged $400 an hour and had never lost a land dispute. She had not prepared for a sentence that required no rebuttal because it was simply and plainly and completely true. Cole looked at her for another moment and then turned and walked up to the porch. Do you want coffee? She blinked. What? I made a pot. You want some or not? She followed him up the steps. He went inside and came back with 2 cups, plain ceramic, heavy, the kind that holds heat. He handed her one and sat in the left chair, and she stood for a moment before she sat in the right one. They faced the valley. The morning light was moving across the ridgeline the way it does when there is no wind slow and wide, lighting the tops of the trees one line at a time. Sloan held the cup with both hands and looked out at the land below. The pasture ran down from the fence line in a long, gentle slope. There were fence posts she could see that Cole had replaced recently fresh-cut wood, slightly lighter in color than the older ones. The kitchen garden on the east side was covered with a hand-strung mesh that caught the light. Someone had built all of this, not contracted it out or hired it done, built it, post by post, row by row, over the course of years, with the intention of staying a very long time. She didn't say any of that, but she sat in the chair and drank the coffee and felt the particular quiet of a place that had been made by someone who loved it. They didn't talk much. Cole drank his coffee and looked at the valley and didn't fill the silence with anything. Sloan found that she didn't feel the need to either. When she finally stood to go, her phone buzzed against her leg. Finch. Board wants to move the timeline up. Equipment on site Monday. She read the message twice. Then she looked at the house, at the plaque she had glimpsed through the door, at the new porch boards, at the window with the double panes Cole had fitted himself, and she typed back 2 words. Stand by. Finch did not reply immediately. The silence from his end settled over her like a wall she had put up herself and wasn't entirely sure she wanted. That night at the county hotel, Sloane sat at the desk with the full project binder open in front of her survey maps, cost projections, board minutes, Finch's correspondence going back 18 months. She had read all of it before. She knew every number. But she called the project's lead engineer directly, not through Finch, directly. The engineer hesitated before he spoke. Then he said, there had been an alternative routing proposal submitted to Finch 6 weeks ago. A 3-degree northern shift in the lift corridor. Additional cost of approximately $800,000. Finch had rejected it without bringing it to the board. Sloane thanked him and ended the call. She sat for a while without moving. Then she reached under the desk and pulled out the worn canvas bag she carried everywhere, the one that held her laptop, her notebooks, and one other item she had never removed. Her father's old computer, a scratched-up machine she had taken from his study the week after the funeral and never quite been able to leave behind. She opened it. The desktop was exactly as Gerald had left it. She had opened it a dozen times in 2 years and always closed it again without doing much. Tonight she moved through the folders more slowly. Personal documents, financial records, travel, and then a folder simply labeled USS Harlan County 2014. She clicked on it. Inside was a single file, a long text document dated September of that year, written in her father's voice. He had been aboard a Navy destroyer as part of a civilian defense contractor review. There had been a fire in the engine room. The document described the smoke, the heat, the disorientation of moving through a passageway where visibility dropped to nothing in under a minute, and then a hand. Someone grabbing his wrist, pulling him back through the smoke and the heat with a grip that did not waver, did not slow down, did not let go until Gerald was in open air coughing on the deck. Gerald had written, I never saw his face clearly. The smoke was too thick. I only saw his left arm. A tattoo Navy in black block letters along the forearm. He didn't say a single word the entire time. Not one. At the bottom of the document, a note in Gerald's handwriting that had been scanned and attached. Hired a private investigator in 2018. No result. His name I will never know. Sloane stared at the screen. She looked at the tattoo in her memory, the dark ink she had glimpsed on Cole's forearm when he reached to push open his door. The letters. Navy. Harlan County, Kentucky. Former Navy SEAL. 10 years ago, Cole would have been 28 years old. 6 years into his service. It fit. Every piece of it fit. The man who had pulled her father out of a burning ship and the man she had given 3 days to leave his home were the same person. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. When Cole texted her at 11 that night, do you actually know why the lift corridor can't be rerouted? Or are you going by what Finch told you she did not need 10 seconds to respond? She typed back, I know. And there's more than the project. I need to talk to you. Tomorrow morning, if you'll let me. His reply came quickly. 7 o'clock. I'll be here. At midnight, Sloane called Finch and told him she needed every file from the Harlan County project going back to the original land survey, everything, including material from the period before she took over. Finch asked why. She said, because I'm the CEO and I have never read the original source files. That's why. There was a pause on his end, just long enough to register. The files arrived in her inbox before 3 in the morning. She went through them methodically, oldest first. Contracts, survey reports, environmental assessments, subcontractor agreements, and then, buried in a subfolder marked Resolved Internal, a labor incident report dated 3 years ago. A site fatality, a slope-clearing operation conducted by a Vetterli subcontractor in Harlan County, a landslide caused by improper terrain grading. 1 worker killed. Name of deceased, Diane Hargrove. County of residence, Harlan County, Kentucky. Surviving family, husband, Cole Hargrove. Daughter, Nora Hargrove. Age at time of incident, 2 years old. Sloane read the name. Read it again. In the past 24 hours, she had learned 2 things that could not be undone. The man she was trying to remove from his home had once reached into a burning ship and pulled her father out by the wrist without asking for anything in return. And the company she had inherited, built by her father, managed in his name, carrying her name now, had been responsible, through a subcontractor's negligence, for the death of that man's wife. Finch knew both things. He had known them from the beginning. and he had said nothing. She sat at the hotel desk with the document open on her screen and the cursor blinking and did not move for a long time. At nearly 1 in the morning, she called Cole. He answered after 2 rings, voice clear and even, the voice of someone who had not been asleep. 7 tomorrow, she said. I meant it. There are things you need to know. A pause. Then, I'll be on the porch. She arrived exactly at 7. No Finch. No staff. She had driven herself from the hotel in the gray pre-dawn and parked at the base of the path up to the house. Cole was on the porch when she came up the steps. He handed her a cup of coffee without asking how she took it. They sat in the same 2 chairs as before, facing the valley, watching the mist move through the lower pasture in slow drifts. Sloane set 2 documents on the table between them. I need to tell you 2 things, she said, and I'm going to tell you both of them because you have the right to know. Not because it helps my position. It doesn't. Cole looked at the documents, but didn't reach for them yet. The first one is an incident report, Sloane said. 3 years ago, a subcontractor working under a veterinary project in this county had a slope clearing operation go wrong. There was a landslide. A woman was killed. She paused. Her name was Diane Hargrove. She was your wife. The report was filed internally and resolved internally 6 months before I became CEO. Finch managed it. He never told me it existed. Cole picked up the first document. He held it in both hands and read it slowly, line by line, the way a person reads something they have been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. His jaw was tight. His hands did not move. The valley below was very quiet. When he set the report down, Sloane pushed the second document across the table. My father was a civilian defense contractor, she said. 10 years ago, he participated in an equipment review aboard a Navy destroyer. There was a fire in the engine room. Someone pulled him out. She let a moment pass. He wrote about it afterward. He spent 4 years trying to identify the person. He never could. All he remembered was a tattoo Navy, left forearm. The man didn't say a word. Cole went very still. He looked at the printed pages, at the scanned handwriting at the bottom. Then he looked up at Sloane. USS Harlan County, he said quietly. September. I was 28. 28, Sloane said. Neither of them spoke. Do you remember him? She asked. Cole looked out at the valley for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was level. I remember. I just never knew who he was. Sloane looked at the man sitting across from her, at the weathered hands, the straight back, the face of someone who had lived inside consequences without complaint. He had pulled her father out of a burning ship. He had come home to build a house for his wife on this mountain. He had lost her. He had raised his daughter alone and kept building and kept quiet and kept the house because it was the one thing left that connected his daughter to her mother. And the company bearing Sloane's name had taken Diane from him without ever once looking him in the face. Cole stood. He picked up her cup, went inside, and came back with it refilled. He set it down in front of her without a word. It was such a small thing. It was the most significant thing anyone had done for her in 2 years. Finch moved fast. By the time Sloane landed back in Chicago for the emergency board meeting he had called, the framing was already set. Sloane had made unauthorized contact with the subject of an active legal dispute, had accessed confidential historical files without documented cause, and had expressed sentiments to a third party. 3 of the 8 board members, men who had worked alongside Gerald Vetterli from the beginning, men who still thought of Sloane as the founder's daughter rather than the CEO, were already aligned with Finch's position. The project could not be delayed. The farmhouse would be cleared. Any deviation from the approved corridor was financially unacceptable. One of the board members said it without much delicacy. You're still very young, Sloane. These situations require a certain kind of experience to navigate. Sloane sat at the head of the glass table and looked out at Lake Michigan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was the youngest person in the room. She had been the youngest person in most rooms since the day her father died. She had spent 2 years proving that her age was not a liability. Today, she was no longer interested in proving it. She was thinking about something her father had said to her in the weeks before he died, when he was walking her through the operational side of the company with the focused urgency of a man who knew he was running out of time. He had said, "There are some pieces of land you don't buy, Sloane, and there are some people you don't move. Your job is to know the difference." She had thought he was talking about strategy, about market positioning, about the kinds of investments that looked good on paper and destroyed community goodwill. He hadn't been talking about any of that. After the meeting, she stepped into the hallway and called Cole. "I want to ask you something," she said when he answered. "Do you want to fight this?" "Legally, with everything it requires." "Depends on what you mean by everything," Cole said. "I mean, I will give you access to every document you need. The incident report, Finch's internal emails, the original private land registration filing that he omitted from the acquisition paperwork, everything." A pause. "Why would you do that?" Sloan watched a boat move slowly across the lake far below. "Because my father would have wanted me to. And because it's right." Cole said nothing for a moment. Then, "Send it." That night, Finch discovered that Sloan had begun transferring files to Cole's attorney. He drafted an internal complaint against her breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized disclosure of proprietary documents. He sent it to the 3 board members who were already in his corner. In the process, he carbon copied the wrong address. The message chain, which included a lengthy thread of emails going back 3 years, documenting Finch's knowledge of the Diane Hargrove incident from the week it occurred, and his deliberate decision to classify it internally rather than disclose it to the incoming CEO, was forwarded to Sloan's Langpercent's assistant, who forwarded it to Sloan, who read it in full, attached it to a message, and sent it to the firm of independent outside counsel she had retained the previous morning. She turned off her phone and slept better than she had in months. The equipment arrived at the farm at 6 in the morning, not with board authorization. Finch had coordinated directly with the site contractor the previous afternoon, citing emergency timeline provisions buried in paragraph 14 of the subcontract. 2 machines were staged at the western fence line. By the time the sun came up over the ridge, a tracked excavator and a skid steer, engines idling, exhaust hanging in the cold morning air. The crew lead had a packet of paperwork with the Vetterli Alpine logo in the upper corner. He had been told the property occupant was unlikely to cause significant delay. Cole walked out of the front door at 6:04 with a cup of coffee in his hand. He came down the porch steps and across the yard and stopped between the machines and the fence. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for anything. He set the cup down on top of a fence post and crossed his arms and stood still in the gray morning fog. 38 years old, 6 feet even, with a particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have waited out situations considerably worse than a pair of machines and a crew lead with paperwork. He looked directly at the crew lead. The crew lead looked back at him. He looked at his documents. He looked at the machines. He looked at Cole again. He picked up his radio and said he needed to hold for site confirmation before proceeding with any demolition activities. The excavator sat with its engine running and its arm at rest. Nobody moved. Cole picked up his coffee and drank it. 43 minutes later, a rental car came up the road at a speed that put a rooster tail of dust behind it across the lower pasture. Sloan had taken the 5:30 flight out of O'Hare, the earliest available, booked from her phone in the hotel corridor after she'd read Finch's contractor authorization text the previous evening. She was still wearing the clothes she'd had on at midnight. She crossed the field without slowing down, pulled out her phone, and called the Vetterli project director's personal number. "Shut it all down," she said. "Every piece of equipment on this site. Right now, my authorization. Log the time." She ended the call and turned to face Douglas Finch, who had also arrived on site, having driven up from the county seat where he had been waiting and whose expression, at the sight of Sloan crossing the field toward him, had gone through several changes in rapid succession. "You concealed a worker fatality from your CEO for 3 years, she said. Her voice was the kind of steady that has nothing left to prove. "You rejected a viable engineering alternative without board disclosure. You deliberately omitted a registered inheritance clause from a land acquisition filing. You coordinated a demolition order without board authorization and without notifying the CEO. She looked at him steadily. "As of this morning, you are no longer the legal director of Vetterli Alpine Group. Security will meet you at the Chicago office." Finch looked past her at Cole, who was standing on the porch of the house with his arms still crossed, watching. He looked at the tattoo on Cole's left forearm, visible now in the clear morning light, with no smoke and no hurry, and no reason not to read it plainly, 4 letters in black ink along the muscle. He left without speaking. Sloan pulled up the board on a video call from the field. She was standing in the grass with the mountain behind her and the idle equipment behind her and Cole's house still standing behind all of it. She laid out the situation in 3 minutes. The rerouting, the engineering report Finch had suppressed, the cost, the timeline. The 3-degree northern shift added 11 days to the construction schedule and $800,000 to the budget. The lift would still open before the season. She needed a vote, 6-2. When the last truck pulled out through the gate and the field went quiet, Cole was still on the porch. Sloan walked back across the yard toward her car. She had a return flight to rebook and a company reorganization to begin, and a legal process that was going to occupy the next several months. She had things to do. "Hey," Cole said. She stopped. "You want coffee?" Sloan turned around. She looked at him standing on the porch of his house, the house he had built board by board after his wife died, the house that was still standing this morning because he had stood in front of a piece of equipment without flinching, and she thought about her father writing in the dark of his study about a hand that came out of the smoke and never asked for anything. She walked back across the yard and up the porch steps and sat down in the chair that had become, over the past week, something like her chair. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." 3 months later, the Vetterli Alpine Resort opened on schedule. The lift ran smoothly along the northern route, cutting across the ridge above the tree line without touching the farm below. On clear days, if you stood on the eastern porch of Cole's house and looked up, you could see the gondola cars moving across the sky far enough away to be beautiful, close enough to remember. Douglas Finch resigned the week the outside counsel delivered its findings. The email thread he had accidentally forwarded proved to be the central exhibit. The settlement that followed resolved two things at once: the subcontractor's liability in Diane's death and the land itself. As part of the agreement, Vetterli Alpine Group formally and permanently relinquished all acquisition claims on the Hargrove property. No court order required it. No judge compelled it. Sloan signed it herself on a Tuesday morning in a Chicago conference room before anyone asked her to. Cole signed nothing except his own name on the deed, the same deed his father had signed before him, now returned to exactly where it had always belonged. The Hargrove family also received a financial settlement from the subcontractor's liability insurer enough that Cole no longer needed to take 5 repair jobs a week to stay ahead of the bills. He used part of it to build a new porch addition on the east side of the house, facing the valley, in the direction Diane used to sit in the evenings. The carved plaque was still on the living room wall. Below the original inscription, he had added a second line, cut in newer wood. She would have wanted this place to be full again. On a Tuesday afternoon in April, Sloan drove up the mountain alone. No reason she could name precisely. Cole was painting the new porch railing when she pulled up. The sound of her car brought Nora to the window, and a moment later the girl came out the front door with a folded piece of paper in her hand. She held it out to Sloan without saying anything. Sloan unfolded it. A pencil drawing the house on the hill, 2 figures standing on the porch, and above them, tiny and light, the gondola cars moving across the sky. At the bottom, in the careful, uneven letters of an 8-year-old, "Now it's pretty." Sloan looked up. Cole was leaning against the porch railing, watching the two of them. He gave one slow nod. She gave one back. That evening, they sat on the eastern porch after Nora had gone to bed, the valley spread out below them in the last of the light. The air had the particular warmth of a Kentucky spring, the kind that arrives after a long winter and makes the whole ridge seem surprised by itself. Sloan looked out at the valley for a while before she spoke. "Do you regret it? Not leaving when you had the chance?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the ridge, at the gondola cars just barely visible in the fading light, at the valley his wife had loved enough to choose. Then he turned and looked at her. "If I'd left," he said, "you wouldn't be sitting here." Sloan looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away first. Cole reached over and laid his hand on top of hers, easy, unhurried, the way a person handles something they intend to keep, and Sloan did not pull back. Sloan Vetterli had built a dozen resorts on the most beautiful mountains in America. She had sat in boardrooms in Chicago and Denver and Aspen and made decisions that moved millions of dollars and hundreds of workers and entire hillsides. She had learned, very early, that the way to hold power was to never let anything hold you. But tonight she was sitting in a wooden chair on a porch in Harlan County, Kentucky, with a man's hand resting over hers, and she understood for the first time what her father had meant. Not the strategy, not the philosophy, the actual thing, in the actual world. There are some places you don't build on. There are some people you don't move. Some things are not meant to be constructed, only stayed in.